Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rick Lufkin, chair of MIT's Cardinal and Gray Society. Welcome to the concluding installment of our three-part 2021 Spring Virtual Speaker Series. As always, members of our companion organization, the Emma Rogers Society, are especially warmly welcomed. Thank you for joining Cardinal and Gray members today and for your enduring support of the Institute. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to our presenter today. Please type them into the Q&A box on Zoom whenever they occur to you. While we still cannot be physically together, we are extremely grateful to be connected with you all. Please note that this program will be recorded and available for later viewing on the Cardinal and Gray website. Our presenter today is Edward B. Roberts, the David Sarnoff Professor of Management of Technology and founder and chair of the MIT Entrepreneurship Center, now renamed as the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship. Ed has had a decades-long career encompassing both academic and commercial endeavors. He is particularly qualified to speak on the topic of entrepreneurship, having founded or co-founded innumerable companies and had a valuable governance role in others, and researched and written prolifically about the process. He has literally written the two bookends on high-tech business creation and growth. His latest book, Celebrating Entrepreneurs, How MIT Nurtured Pioneering Entrepreneurs Who Built Great Companies, describes the history of MIT's transformation into an entrepreneurial juggernaut. Ed's own entrepreneurship is as prolific in academia at MIT and MIT Sloan as in industry. He has become internationally known for his research, teaching, and active involvement in many aspects of technology management, including technology strategy, corporate venturing, product innovation management, and especially technology-based entrepreneurship. Underpinning all this success are his 4 degrees from MIT, including an SB, an SM in electrical engineering, an SM in management, and a PhD in economics. I am now delighted to pass the virtual microphone to Professor Ed Roberts for his remarks on how the MIT entrepreneurship ecosystem helps build great pioneering companies.
Hi, I'm delighted to be with you today. And I'm one of you in that I have my red jacket and you can barely see the 57 on it. I thought of putting it on today for the purpose of this event. And fortunately, I found it was much too big on me. I've lost a lot of weight over the last several years, and I'm very happy with that situation. So today I'm going to basically try as briefly as possible to review the past 50 years of building an entrepreneurship ecosystem at MIT and having it have great impact on MIT itself. And then I'm going to try to concentrate on the great pioneering companies that have come from MIT that we discuss in the book. Now, this book, Celebrating Entrepreneurs, How MIT Nurtured Pioneering Entrepreneurs Who Built Great Companies, is an Amazon book in Kindle and in a beautiful paperback. And I have no hesitation about promoting it because on the first page, you'll see it says all royalties are to be donated to MIT endowment funds that support MIT-wide entrepreneurship programs. So I invite all of you to join with me in helping to finance the entrepreneurial development of today's and the future students at MIT. Let me start with a brief review of where all of this began. In 1963, I was a second-year assistant professor in the management school. And not entirely with great planning behind it, I started doing research on the spin-off companies that came out of MIT laboratories, technology-based for inevitably, certainly innovation-based in what they were doing and the like. We started with the instrumentation lab. We went to the Lincoln lab. We then went to the other major labs. I then went on and I looked at the academic departments. I looked at faculty and staff spin-outs from engineering and science departments as well. I then frankly got tired of looking at MIT as the source of all of these companies coming out directly. So I started to study nearby government laboratories and what was coming from those labs. And then I convinced two very major corporations to let me in so that I could try to look at the companies that have come from those companies as well. Now, when I say I mean I and my research assistants and my graduate thesis students from all across the campus, because as we started doing this, the word went out somehow, and I began having grad students from every engineering department come over and ask if they could work with me on a thesis that somehow related to entrepreneurship in their field of endeavor. And I welcomed them all because that gave us some added technical knowledge about the entrepreneurs themselves, whom we were going to do face-to-face interviews with a structured interview that was gathering in-depth information on all of them. So we not only proceeded with this whole phase of what I called spin-off studies, looking at an organization and what came from it, we then began studying entrepreneurs in technology fields. And we took one after another field based in a sense on the opportunity offered me by a grad student walking into my office and saying he wanted to work with me. So we worked on mechanically based companies and electrically based companies, and we did things in energy fields and so forth over a period of time from the 1963 start as an assistant professor until basically early into the 1990s. Now, all of this research work was pulled together in my 1990 book. My 1990 book was called Entrepreneurs in High Technology, Lessons from MIT and Beyond. And it communicated chapter by chapter the kinds of foundings we had about entrepreneurial founders, the process of getting a company underway, the funding issues involved, the attacks on new product markets, the product development issues, the market development issues, you name it. We discussed it in depth in those chapters in that relatively big book published by Oxford University Press, and I think not very available today, published in 1990. By the way, I just commented to our group here that Tsinghua University Press in China has just agreed to translate into Chinese that 1990 book. So it'll be quite interesting to see what Chinese reaction to the book is. They also are going to be translating the book celebrating entrepreneurs. So they're going to have the bookends in Chinese available for any of you who have the patience to wait probably a year or so till they're available. So what happened while I was doing studies of entrepreneurship was essentially within MIT, nothing else. There were no organizations within MIT that were devoted to entrepreneurship. There was one course. It had been started and taught by a senior lecturer who had done a great job of building his own company, and he came to MIT and volunteered to teach a course. That course was called New Enterprises, started in 1961, never had high enrollment all during this period of time. 15, 20 students might enroll in that seminar kind of course. And that was it educationally. There were no organizations within MIT that were focused on entrepreneurship. There was just essentially me doing research and all of my grad students working with me. In 1969, a small group of us, then relatively young alumni, got together and worked very hard to finally overcome the resistance of the MIT Alumni Association to let us do a trial seminar called How to Start Your Own Company. And it turned out that we had an overwhelming response to that seminar, such that we as a group continued with then alumni organization support to roll out that seminar over the next 3 years across the United States to 8 major cities, collaborating with the MIT Alumni Association chapter in each of those cities to essentially replicate the seminar that we had done at MIT. I keynoted every one of those, but the local alumni chapters supplied the expert on marketing, the expert in finance, the expert in this, that, and the other thing. Following our outline, we addressed over 3,300 MIT alumni during that 3-year period of time. That had a lot of impact. That had impact that's testified to by many entrepreneurs who said, I finally decided that that's what I needed to do with my own life. I needed to start a company. And then the first organization started. In 1971, the New York Alumni Association created the New York Venture Clinic. The New York Venture Clinic was its organization to mentor and help startup companies in the New York area. 2 years later, the Boston chapter started the MIT Enterprise Forum of Cambridge. And the New York group liked our title better. So the New York group changed its title to the MIT Enterprise Forum of New York. And suddenly we were off and running. And over an extended period of time, the growth of the MIT Enterprise Forums globally grew to 26 chapters worldwide in which we were all doing the same thing. We were attempting to encourage MIT alumni and others to form their own companies, to mentor them, to help them grow and develop and the like. So this was all happening outside of MIT. Inside, nothing. In 1990, I went to my dean in the Sloan School and proposed that we create, out of Sloan, we create the MIT Entrepreneurship Center. That turned out to be quite a fight, because the question the dean wanted to know is, you're a Sloan faculty member, Ed. What do you mean MIT Entrepreneurship Center? And we had a big argument. I ended up getting every group head in the Sloan School to sign off on my proposal. And the dean looked at that and said, okay, what are we doing next? And we started in 1990, the MIT Entrepreneurship Center, focusing MIT-wide on how to build programs that were going to educate, stimulate, mentor, help MIT students and alums to build new companies. The center was started in 1991. That gave me the authority from my dean to try to hire faculty who would come in and broaden the research program and now broaden the teaching program from the one course we had offered then to whatever it is we could turn out. It was a very difficult job to find faculty because MIT throughout hires PhD graduates from the best and the brightest places. There were no PhD programs in entrepreneurship anyplace in the world. So we were engaged, instead of hiring the best from entrepreneurship PhDs, we were hiring the best we could find whom we thought were close enough that we could convert them toward teaching and research on entrepreneurship. And in 1993, I hired my first faculty member of that sort, and then we kept going to the point that we went from one course and about 20 students in the early days taking entrepreneurship courses to today. And today we have about 65 subjects in entrepreneurship being offered across all of MIT. More than 40 are taught by Sloan School faculty members. The others are taught principally by engineering faculty members. We even have a couple taught by architecture faculty members. There are two courses in entrepreneurship in the architecture school. And a number of those are collaborative, jointly taught courses by a faculty member in engineering and a faculty member in Sloan teaching together. And in this way, we have now spread it from having the 15 or 20 students who took the one course way back when to today. We have multiple thousands of seats in entrepreneurship subjects being taken by active MIT students, undergraduate and graduate students, and even in our executive development programs. So that's one major impact that has occurred over these years as an impact on itself. Let me give you a couple of other illustrations of impact on MIT. The Dean of Undergraduate Admissions told me that a substantial fraction of applicants to MIT undergraduate school, which a lot of us were, say now in their application forms that they hope to be able to start a company before they graduate from MIT with their bachelor's degrees. Have you ever heard of something so outlandish? In our days, we would never have thought that way, that we're going to start a company before we even get out of MIT with a bachelor's degree. We had enough to do just in our studies to then think about doing something of creating a company. I'll give you another measure. in the Sloan School, we have a thing now called the Entrepreneurship and Innovation track. It's basically a concentration area. There's 3 tracks in the Sloan School, but you don't have to be tracked. You can just take a general MBA education today in Sloan. But the track in entrepreneurship has always been the biggest one, and it's always been constrained by room size. The largest room in the Sloan School handled 130 students, and that was therefore the maximum we could admit to the Entrepreneurship and Innovation track until this past year. This past year, remote took over. And suddenly we didn't have a room constraint as to how many people we could accept into the E&I track. So this past year, we had, as the Dean of Admissions at the Sloan School had predicted, we had 220 out of the 400 first-year MBA students at Sloan signing up for majoring in the Entrepreneurship and Innovation track. More than 50% of the graduate students in management focusing their interests on entrepreneurship. So this is yet another impact measure of what has happened. And let me give you a final impact measure at the moment, and that is from the back cover of this book. And I'm going to read from someone you will know. An entrepreneurship tornado continues to blow at MIT. The energy of entrepreneurship rises through our classrooms, labs, and centers. It has been central to who we are as an institution for 50 years of extraordinary service and achievement. Raphael Reif, President, MIT. So we've had a lot of impact. By the way, Raphael said for the past 50 years, and he's absolutely right. If he said 60, he'd be wrong, because 60 years ago, there wasn't this kind of activity or opportunity for study, for impact at MIT. People did things and started companies, but they weren't being helped institutionally to make this happen. Okay, let's now talk about what impact the program has had. And first, I'm going to talk about the impact we've had on industry generally as direct alumni. In 2009, we did the first study ever of a total university's alumni with a focus upon activities in entrepreneurship. We repeated the study because we needed to get fresher data in 2015 using 2014 data. What we found, 2014, was that over 30,200 living companies had been started by living MIT alumni. I emphasize living. Why? Because if a company had been formed but it was out of business, we didn't count it. If the entrepreneur who founded it had died, we didn't count the company. If the company was started by an MIT faculty member who had not gotten a degree from MIT, we didn't count it. If it was started by an MIT research staff member who didn't have a degree, we didn't count it. If it was started by somebody who licensed the technology from MIT on which the company was based, but who didn't have an MIT degree, we didn't count it. So the 30,200 companies is an extremely conservative measure of the impact that MIT has had on entrepreneurship, primarily in areas of technology and innovation. Well, there's other measures. Those 30,000 companies employed 4.6 million people. Those 30,000 plus companies generated revenues of $2 trillion. $2 trillion in 2014 was the equivalent of the 10th largest economy in the world. So what I'm telling you is that in 2014, 6-7 years ago, MIT alumni were creating the kind of impact that is of the nation level impact, the 10th largest economy in the world, coming from just the then living MIT alumni. So that's a measure of impact, and we can go on with other kinds of broad industry measures. I'll give you one last one that talks to industry broadly, and then we'll deal with companies more individually. That is, in the 1980s, from our own data, we know that about 6,000 new companies were formed by MIT alumni. In the decade of the 2000s, we know that that had doubled. About 12,000 new companies were formed by MIT alumni in the decade of the 2000s. In the decade just completed, the decade of the 2010s, our best estimate is that over 25,000 new companies have been formed by MIT alumni. So the growth impact of the alumni force in entrepreneurship on the world has been dramatic in the past, is rapidly growing, and is very dramatic today. Okay, now let me turn to what's in the book about the companies themselves. If you think about entrepreneuring and starting a new company, it turns out that most new companies in the United States and abroad are copycats, or they're just incremental changes on something else that already existed. The incremental change might add some features, make some improvements on existing products that are already in the market. If it's a manufacturing process innovation, it may improve the speed of the manufacturing process. It may upgrade its quality. Those are all incremental. Most new companies started by most people are copycat or incremental advances. At MIT, we have fostered a culture that is different. And the culture that we have fostered is a culture of pioneering. Starting from scratch in an area that is as yet undiscovered, unexploited, and building something that is dramatic and getting into that area. So we have that as a critical impact that we are beginning to see. In the book, I do 4 deep dives. The deep dives are life sciences and biotechnology, the internet, from CAD/CAM to robotics, and finally, to be different, modern finance. Let me now start with them chapter by chapter, from biotechnology and life sciences. Okay, the very first biotech company in the world was started by an MIT alum with 2 degrees, 2 bachelor's degrees, management and chemistry. That alum was Bob Swanson. He recruited a professor from California to join with him to form Genentech, the first biotech company in the world, in California. The due diligence by the finance people who were going to invest in the company was carried out by an MIT faculty member. That MIT faculty member was flown out there, name is Phil Sharp, to look at the technology of these people in California and to answer the question, was this something worthwhile? And Phil Sharp assessed it and said, it looks to me like these guys will in fact accomplish technically what they say they'll accomplish, but I haven't a clue if you can make any money out of that. Well, he was saying that to 2 MIT alums. One MIT alum, Ray Schaefer, was the head of venture investing for a Latin American mining company. And he was in conversation with Tom Perkins, another MIT alum, founder of Kleiner Perkins, one of the very first technology-oriented Silicon Valley-based venture capital firms, 2 MIT alums. And Phil Sharp was saying, well, I don't know if you can make any money out of it. But then both those guys decided that they would become the investors in this first company, Genentech. 2 years later, Phil Sharp decided that this field was fascinating, and he and a colleague from Harvard formed the first biotech company in the greater Boston area, Biogen, formed and located 1 block away from Kendall Square. Why? Because they knew that if they were going to attract PhDs in the field to come to work for them, it had to be pretty close to an institution, and being 1 block away from MIT was the best that they could get. Those of you, as me, who grew up in that time period around MIT, knew that that wasn't a very attractive area 1 block away from MIT, behind what is now the whole of the wonderful Kendall Square. In the old days, that wasn't a great place, but Biogen located itself there and started the company. In that chapter on biotech, I talk about Bob Langer. Bob Langer and Langer Lab have broken all records of starting companies. In the biomaterials and biotech fields, Bob Langer and his students and his postdocs have started over 40 companies, and we discuss that. And then also in that same chapter, I talk about somebody that you today, I'm sure, know. and that's Noubar Afeyan. And Noubar Afeyan was the first biotech processing PhD in the chemical engineering department under Professor Danny Wang. And Noubar went out and became an entrepreneur. And then when Noubar did very well in his company, he came back to Boston and started a venture capital firm. And that firm now is Flagship Pioneering, which creates and spins out its own biotech companies. Flagship has already spun out about 40 companies in the biotech field. One of them you certainly know, because you've probably seen Noubar Afeyan on the 11 o'clock news as chairman of the board of Moderna, which brought mRNA technology in to solve the problems of the COVID and the like. And by the way, Moderna's presence is very clear to anybody sitting in Cambridge. They are 1 block away from the Mass Avenue entrance to MIT. And by the way, around the corner from them is the Pfizer Research Laboratory that we also hear about relating to what's going on in the field of coping with the COVID coronavirus. Okay, so let me stop about that chapter and where we talked about what's happened in biotechnology. Let's turn to the next one, the internet. Some of you know Bob Metcalfe. Bob Metcalfe is a double degree holder from MIT in electrical engineering and in management. Bob also is the co-founder of the company called 3Com, which is the Ethernet company, a very critical company to the internet because it ties together all the computers. Well, Bob quotes, he says that anything good and great has a lot of fathers. And he says, in the case of the internet, there's no big problem because all the fathers are MIT alums. And is that an overstatement? Well, slightly, but not very much. So you go to the government office that started the internet projects, DARPA, and you find that the leadership of the programs were MIT faculty and MIT alums. You now look at the contractor that undertook the initial work on creating the first of the internets and competing with 150 other contractors desiring to get that contract from DARPA, and winning the contract was Bolt, Beranek, and Newman, all from MIT. And then in the same chapter, we discuss who did what on the project of creating it. And the project manager and the program heads and the key developers were all MIT graduates, most of them from electrical engineering, but not all. And that was the beginning of the internet. And then we have its commercialization. It took Congress to say it was okay to commercialize this technology as a communication technology. The first company that came out was Telenet, started by Bolt, Beranek, and Newman. By the way, BB&N approached AT&T to possibly invest in Telenet. AT&T turned them down and said they didn't really think that this was a very promising opportunity, the internet. And if it turns out that the technology is attractive, they were sure Bell Laboratories would be able to invent anything that was necessary for AT&T to succeed in this field. So much for being the pioneer in getting something underway and being the existing dominant firm in the field and focusing more on incremental innovation and the like, serving very large population. In that same chapter, we go on and we go into other companies like AOL, co-founded by an MIT alum and somebody not from MIT, not a strange situation. And we now talk about Akamai. Akamai came out of MIT, not only came out of MIT, it competed for the 50K business plan competition and didn't win. And then it started Akamai. Akamai today, located around the corner from MIT, next door to the Marriott Hotel, carries about 30% of the world traffic on the internet. And you can continue this, and then you can go and look at the copycats. So copycatting in this field is taking the internet from America and bringing it to other countries. Well, what happened in bringing it to China, the largest population opportunity in the world? Charles Zhang, MIT PhD in physics, in 1996, decided that he wanted to move a company to China and start an internet company in China, and he did it with a co-founder, me. And I served for 20 years on the board of Sohu.com in China, and decided a few years ago it was time for me to get off the board, leaving the rest of the all-Chinese board to govern Sohu.com, the first internet company in China. And we go on in the same chapter, we go to the cloud, and what we find is that Freddie Karst, MBA from MIT, co-founded the company with his best friend who was a CTO of Salesforce.com, and they started Okta, which is now really doing wonderful stuff in the cloud. And that is a chapter on the internet. And then the next chapter, deep dive, is on CAD-CAM, from CAD-CAM to robotics. Well, CAD-CAM's an interesting field, and CAD-CAM comes out of either electronics CAD-CAM or mechanical CAD-CAM. Well, it turns out that the pioneering companies in both of those approaches came out of MIT. And they came out of MIT in the same month, and both of them started in the same town of Bedford, Massachusetts. The first company was Applicon, started by 4 PhDs from Lincoln Laboratory, 2 of whom were from MIT. The 2 from MIT had previously served briefly as assistant professors in Course 6. And the mechanically based one was done by Phil Villers at the same time with his old boss, whom he brought in because he knew he didn't have managerial skills. So he convinced his boss to join him in forming Computer Vision. And those 2, Applicon and Computer Vision, were the first 2 companies in the CAD-CAM field, and they labeled the field CAD-CAM. And then we have the company which still today dominates the field in its software. That company is formed by John Hirschtick. Company is called that company is called SolidWorks. And the SolidWorks software, if you talk to anybody who is a current engineer doing design and development work, they are inevitably still using SolidWorks software to do this. John Hirschtick started his first company while an undergraduate taking the New Enterprises course, that first course that got started in 1961. By the time he was an undergrad, this was now a serious course being taught in 2 sections each semester, 4 sections, average enrollment being 100 students per semester per section. So probably 400 students were taking New Enterprises, their entry course into entrepreneurship. And it had a project, you had to write a business plan, and Hirschtick and his co-classmate, Axel Bashiver, who formed later Bolt Innovations, started a company and the like, and later John Hirschtick started SolidWorks. And then John took it to the cloud with another company. So this is the CAD-CAM area. And we now move to robotics. And in robotics, the key father of robotics was MIT faculty member Rod Brooks, who was in charge of the robotics laboratory in CSAIL at MIT. And he and his 2 grad students, Helen Greiner and Colin Angle, started the first real robotics company, iRobot, and brought to the market the first real consumer products company, the robotic vacuum cleaner. Colin Angle is still CEO of iRobot. Helen Greiner, interestingly, ran the part of iRobot that gets less publicity but had great value. She ran the military division. And the military division of iRobot was developing robots that went into caves and went into other bad places so as to avoid deaths of soldiers in Vietnam. And the parallel operation of the commercial entity for the home of the vacuum cleaner and the commercial entity for the military, the robotics movement into dangerous places, was all being done by the same company, iRobot, and started out of MIT. Now, if you go beyond that as robotics, you can go to other key aspects of robotics. So for example, the big problem of having online shopping was that the warehouses were too costly to operate, and everybody in the business was losing money on filling packages. Well, Mick Mounts, an MIT Mechie, and his fraternity brothers, he recruited a whole bunch of them. His co-founder was one of his PhD fraternity brothers, getting his PhD at North Carolina State, formed a company called Kiva Systems. And Kiva Systems was the one that developed the first robotics thing that would do pick and pack and take care of the automation of an entire warehouse. Amazon was one of their customers. And Amazon quickly realized that, hey, what these guys were doing was something that Amazon needed desperately. So in a very short period of time, Amazon bought Kiva Systems and renamed it Amazon Robotics. If you now go to the present state of the robotics field, the present state is autonomous vehicles. And if you say, well, who are the people who've developed all the technology to drive cars? Well, again, you quickly find that the leading company in the field is a company called Mobileye. That company is an Israeli company formed by two MIT PhDs in mechanical engineering. And the CEO then, at the beginning, was Amnon Shashua. And that company was purchased by Intel, the largest purchase of a company in Israel by a foreign company. And Amnon Shashua is still running the Mobileye division of the company, which Intel has decided ought to remain in Israel, run by this MIT PhD alum. Okay, so much for CAD/CAM to robotics. Let me turn to the last chapter. The last chapter, it's not the last chapter of the book, it's the last chapter of the deep dives. There's more in which I discuss all kinds of other people as well. But the last chapter is modern finance. Modern finance chapter is divided into three areas. First is venture capital. Second is quantitative investing and funds management. Third is electronic trading. In each of the three areas, the fields were founded by MIT faculty and MIT alum. Take venture capital, a name you will all know, Carl Taylor Compton, then chairman of the corporation, but previously president of MIT, was the first founder of the first company in venture capital, American Research and Development Company. The treasurer of American Research and Development Company, AR&D, was the treasurer of MIT. There were four investors, three insurance companies, and one university that invested in AR&D. The university that invested was MIT. It was an MIT, all MIT-based company, the technical advisory board with three department heads from the engineering school at MIT. It then hired the hired hand, Professor Dorio from the Harvard Business School. We didn't have a business school at that time at MIT. General Dorio became the president of AR&D and quickly learned that the best thing for him to do was to invest in MIT spin-off companies. The company that made the most money for AR&D was Digital Equipment Corporation, coming out of Lincoln Laboratory, started by Ken Olson and Harlan Anderson, both out of Lincoln Lab. They made a fortune on that company. They invested $70,000 and got 70% ownership of the company. Somewhat naive on the part of the entrepreneurs and a good deal for the AR&D people. If you then look at the follow-on building of the venture capital field, you find many MIT following it. I mentioned Tom Perkins of Kleiner Perkins. Kleiner Perkins, when it was funded with $5 million, was the largest venture capital firm in the world with funding of $5 million. So things are different today than they had been when pioneers were doing things. And then the venture capital firms went overseas. And we had people starting venture capital in other countries, particularly heavily in Asia, where there were great opportunities. And you find again that in Japan and in China and in Hong Kong, that the founders of the earliest companies were MIT alumni who were bringing US points of view into Asia to establish venture capital in places where no one would have believed venture capital could survive. Let me leave venture capital. Let me now talk about quantitative investing. Quantitative investing is massive. With MIT having quantitative skills in basically every department, it's a natural that people from all over the school would figure out ways of bringing technical skills and quantitative skills to the investing process. And you have in the commodities field, Helmut Weimar created Commodities Corporation, and that was a pioneering thing. And you have Gary Bergstrom creating one of the world's biggest financial management companies, and that was a pioneering thing. And then, of course, we can't leave out Jim Simons. Jim Simons, a math major at MIT, was the founder and CEO for years of Renaissance Technologies, which is, of course, rumored to be the best performing investment firm in the world, Renaissance Technologies. And those of you like me who were undergraduates at MIT know that you took all your math courses in Building 2, now bearing the name of Jim Simons as the Simons Building, which is a wonderful thing. And finally, we come to electronic trading. Electronic trading, whoever pioneered it must be the last one in it, because there's only one company in the field of electronic trading, and that company is E-Trade, and that company was founded by Bill Porter, an MIT alum. So I'm going to stop at this point in general with the deep dive. I do want to mention there's many more companies that are discussed and described within the book, and I want to just end up with another quote. I quoted from Raphael Reif before. Let me now quote from the present governor of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker. Now, Charlie's a Harvard alum, but Charlie is a frequent guest speaker at MIT Enterprise Forum, MIT Entrepreneurship Center, MIT Entrepreneurship Student Activity celebrations, because he loves it. He recently exclaimed, and I quote, "The capacity of MIT and its people year over year to deliver just amazing new things to serve this country and the world is truly remarkable." And then he listed as examples some MIT alumni founded firms. And he talked about Akamai, HubSpot, Meditech, and PillPack. By the way, all discussed in the book. So MIT entrepreneurial ecosystem, which you call that, has done far more and had far greater impact than any other university's entrepreneurship programs to affect the world. It took 50 years to build it, and in the process, and now, we've dramatically changed the culture of MIT, hugely affected the economies of Greater Boston and the United States, and brought effective entrepreneurship education, development, and impact to the rest of the world. I'm thrilled to bring this message to you, my fellow Cardinal and Gray alum. Thank you.
Ed, thank you, Ed. The story is amazing. One would metaphorically ask, what would the world have done without MIT? But we're not going to get into that right now. One question I would ask, common sense, once upon a time, always to be questioned, said that to be a successful entrepreneur, one had to grow up with a bit of school of hard knocks in terms of understanding the mechanics of business. And nowadays, there seems to be the philosophy that one can educate people to be entrepreneurs. Do you have any comment on how the world has changed from the world of hard knocks, school of hard knocks, to the educated entrepreneur?
Well, I think that the School of Hard Knocks is not a bad place to start, because if you have gone through the traumatic issues of seeing the difference between great success and not so great success, and in particular, having had the inspiration of trying yourself to do it, that's not a bad beginning. But the education has now changed the name of the game. So, but what do we educate them to do? One, we educate them to realize that, hey, this is not a solo game. This is not Horatio Alger baloney. This is a team game. You had better find a partner on whom you'll be able to cry on that person's shoulder. Why? Because you're going to run into difficulties and you're going to run into major trauma. Number two, you're going to not have an easy pathway. If you think you're going to have an easy pathway, guess what? History doesn't say so. History says it's going to be tough. You're going to pivot a lot to doing things differently. You're going to run into obstacles. And by the way, it's going to take a very long time. So you had better have very high motivation from wherever your motivation came. If it came from being part of a School of Hard Knocks, that's great. You better have high motivation. You better have high motivation for the particular thing you're pushing, because you better love it. If you don't love it, how in the world are you going to suffer with the problems that come along with it? And you better have persistence. You can't build a company. I can give you the stories of the exceptions. You know, Kiva Systems sold out, PillPack sold out to Amazon, both cases, 3-4 years. That's an exception. More typically, it's going to take 10 years of hard work to build a company to the point that you really have a solid, substantial company. So we can teach those things. And we can teach how you integrate technical people and management people together as a team. We can teach how to develop meaningful strategy. We can teach the need to emphasize customers and market, not just beautiful technology. We can teach that, and we can illustrate it, and we can get people to understand it. Doesn't hurt if you came from a background where you're self-motivated to begin with.
Our next questioner asks, looking at the magical mystery tour that constitutes Kendall Square, is there any way that that model could be replicated elsewhere?
The model is being tried to be replicated all over the world. I mean, and this is true before Kendall Square was anywhere near what it is now. When Susan Hockfield was president, Susan used to talk about the most wonderful square mile in the world. And the square mile was MIT and Kendall Square. And she would say it has the highest percentage of PhDs per square mile of any square mile in the world. It's a very interesting perspective and certainly true. Well, guess what? That square mile now has some very different dimensions. That square mile, first of all, goes to all of Cambridge. Secondly, it doesn't go just to Cambridge, it goes to Arlington, it goes to Somerville, it goes to Newton, it goes to Belmont. And now, you know, Route 128 died some numbers of years ago. Kendall Square is now rejuvenating. Lexington and the areas that Waltham, which had been left to essentially become nothing very much for a long period of time. Now the flood is moving out there. Why? Because again, people need more space than they can get in Cambridge. And by the way, the rents in Kendall Square are the highest rents of any place in the world, including downtown New York City. So we have an enormous thing that has taken place. And a lot of other people say, hey, we got to try to do that. Now, I have to tell you, we are working very hard at helping all of those other people to do it. A very major outreach from all of MIT, the School of Engineering and the Sloan School, separately and together, have launched programs aimed at many different individual countries to help teach them what we know. Well, you know, somebody would say, well, wait a minute, we're going to allow them to catch up? Jay Forrester was my boss when I moved into the Sloan School. And Jay invited people from the Club of Rome to come into a session with us. And he then sent a note to all the research assistants and said, I want you to prepare all of your work and all your equations and all your computer work in memos to give to these people. I was the senior research assistant. I ran into Jay's office. I said, Professor Forrester, if we give them all of our work, they're going to really be able to catch up with us. And he looked at me, and if anybody knew Jay Forrester, this is a reasonable imitation. He said, Ed, at MIT, we strive to be the best in whatever we do. And we also strive to bring others to our level of capability. And if they catch up with us, that's an indication that we are not working hard enough. And as a grad student, I heard that and said, wow, isn't that interesting? Which means, yes, I guess I got a copy of my equations to give them to somebody else, but I better start working even harder than I am now.
Thank
so
you.
That's attitude throughout MIT. We're trying to help the rest of the world to catch up. And at the meantime, we're trying to run as fast as we possibly can to stay ahead of the game. And so far, we're succeeding at both.
Thank you. Our next questioner asks about the effect of Professor/entrepreneur Amar Bose on the MIT endowment. The MIT endowment. Interesting.
Yes, that's a question that I know about, but no reason why I should know about, except I happen to. Namely, when Amar Bose died, he took his controlling shares in Bose Corporation, turned them into non-voting stock, so as to let those who were there still have the voting control, but gave all of that stock to MIT. So MIT has financial control of Bose Corporation. There's a lot of other people who have done not quite the same, but who have benefited MIT in very substantial financial ways. I thought as you were starting, you were going to say what was the impact of Amar Bose.
Right.
And the impact of Amar Bose as a phenomenal professor was that he personally inspired so many people to follow his lead. His lead was that he visibly was active in his company while he was active completely in his teaching activities. He never essentially stepped back from being a professor at MIT, meeting with his students, stimulating his students and the like. And that's a role model that I think a lot of other faculty at MIT have emulated. Bob Langer is, in a sense, the largest multiplier, because Langer has co-founded 40 companies. But Langer also has the largest number of patents in the world. By the way, good MIT fact, who was the predecessor who had the largest number of patents in the world prior to Bob Langer? Answer, Benjamin Franklin. You say, what? Yes, prior to Langer, Benjamin Franklin had the largest number of patents in the world, and then came Bob Langer. Bob Langer has the largest number of citations of any scientist in the world, and he is still pumping it out and inspiring students and by the way, is so readily available for collaboration and cooperation. As busy as he is, if I send him an email relating to something to do with entrepreneurship, I know I will get a response inside of the next hour, frequently inside of the next 10 minutes. How he does it, I don't know. And he makes himself available to students who are interested in learning more about how does one go about producing companies. I think that attitude permeates the MIT faculty today, for whom entrepreneurship is now a legitimate course. I should add my words, which is, I grew up in an MIT of mens et manus. Today, I say it's a...
Ed, I believe we have a technical concern here. I've lost the video and I've lost the sound. There you are.
Today, we have a prejudicial approach. Our prejudicial approach to transfer is entrepreneurship. And we are doing entrepreneurship in gold, launching it from every part of MIT.
One questioner asking you to be a little bit more introspective. With the best benefit of 2020 hindsight, what does Professor Roberts wish he had done differently over the past 50 years? I'll let you wrestle with that one.
That's a very tricky question. You know, it's more than 50 years because I started in 1953 as a freshman. So I've been in continuous residency at MIT for close to 70 years now. And I have to say that I love every minute of all of this time period. Having been an undergraduate in course 6, and then I was in 6A, so I did co-op. So I got my bachelor's and master's together in 1958. Having that experience was really a wonderful experience. It taught me that the kinds of things I was learning in the classroom and the kinds of things I was learning on the job in 4 different semester assignments at General Electric really came together to make me far better informed and much more interested in the linkages, in the bringing together of the knowledge and some form of use. Now, I didn't have an entrepreneurship experience at General Electric. I had a worker, engineer, whatever it was experience at GE, which was fine. The closest I came to entrepreneurship during that period of time was that my father had a 1-truck oil business. And I grew up helping my father from when I was a little kid. And my father would say to me, Eddie, this is not for you. You need to do something that uses your brains. And that was kind of a launching pad. At MIT, I don't regret anything I did. My second master's degree at Sloan was terrific. My PhD in economics was exciting and gave me lots of more interest and sophistication, I would say, that I didn't have at the master's level. That was great. And I did a lot of stuff that wasn't entrepreneurship that really were blessed. by being at MIT. I served on advisory boards of various government agencies. Though all of those experiences which MIT provided to me were growing experiences that also gave me knowledge and pleasure. So no regrets.
Thank you. One questioner identifies themselves as anonymous, which I regret, because it's a very fair question. The question is, are there no mothers? We talk about the fathers of these businesses. The question is, are there no mothers?
You know, it's a very interesting thing because that is today. You know, I'm still chairman of the center that I created. It was the MIT Entrepreneurship Center. Now it's the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship. And I'm still chairman. And Bill Owlett is my managing director. And I would say that if you said to us, what are the two problems you have today? The two problems we have that we've had for a while is increasing the participation of female students at all levels in all of our entrepreneurship classes and in all the entrepreneurship activities. And secondly, only consciously in the past few years, increasing the role of people of color in these roles. Now, on the side of the women, we have clearly been succeeding. If you look at the entrepreneurship and innovation track, which I mentioned, which is the concentration in the Sloan School, the track enrollment now is around 48% women, 52% men. So the building block activities are now being inhabited essentially as much by women as by men. And I apologize for not having mentioned any woman other than Helen Greiner, because Helen Greiner was the only one that came up in those examples. In the finance chapter, you'll find a lot more women being mentioned, because in fact, I think the entry pathway into financial entrepreneurship and innovation has for some reason been easier for women than going the technical route through the engineering school and through the science departments and the like. Today, one of the culture changes at MIT is that our beloved Susan Hockfield, along with a serial female entrepreneur from biotech, Sangeeta Bhatia, are running a program called the Future Founders Seminar. Future Founders Seminar is aimed at junior female faculty in the life sciences to try to educate and persuade them that they should be launching startup companies. And I think you'll find that the biotech field is getting more and more women doing this and following that pathway. So, you know, we just need to be doing more of those kinds of things. And I'm delighted that a former president of MIT, still active, is taking the lead to do that.
I wanted to thank you for your contributions today. It's been absolutely enlightening. The stories, the depth of the MIT entrepreneurship experience and what it has contributed to the world at large. And we thank you very much for your ability to have quantified, characterized, publicized that fact is tremendous value in the long term. I'd like to bring this evening to a close, this afternoon to a close by just saying, again, thank you, and reminding our audience that tech reunions are coming up June 4th through 6th. There will be announcements shortly coming up on your on your email to the details of tech reunions. Remembering that this program is being recorded. It will be available on the website, Cardinal and Gray website, in a couple of weeks. And the Ed's book has been highlighted in the chat feature if you want to take a look at it. So for this afternoon, thank you. Good evening.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.